Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. Tonight we continue our series Earth to New York. This week it's Venezuela to New York. And Mayor Bloomberg gave his State of the City address today. We'll show you excerpts and get reaction to his plan for tax cuts and teacher tenure reform. First, here's this week's online video roundup, our weekly handful of newsworthy videos that we found on the web. Now, this first clip actually comes courtesy of the New York Times website, where their TV critic Virginia Heffernan keeps a TV blog. And if you think politics are polarized in this country, check out how a Sunni and a Shiite went at it on Al Jazeera TV over the execution of Saddam Hussein. This is an extended excerpt because the action never stops.
هل تؤيد إعدام صدام حسين؟ 4787 88.6 من الشارع لا، 11.4 لا. ماذا تقول لهم؟
بس إذا سمحت،
بس دقيقة
قبل ما يجاوب. أنا أريد أبدأ البرنامج أو الحلقة. أدعو المشاهدين لأن نقرأ الفاتحة على روح الرئيس الشهيد صدام حسين.
نحن هنا
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
الفاتحة على أحد. نحن هنا ندين رجل قتل آلاف وملايين من العراقيين. لسنا هنا لنقرأ الفاتحة على أحد، على ظالم وطاغوت قد سفك دماء العراقيين. صدام حسين ليس قائدا وليس زعيما عربيا. صدام حسين تسلق إلى الحكم سرقة وغلسة في ليل مظلم، قتل أصحابه، قتل رفاق دربه في سبيل الوصول إلى دفة الحكم. صدام حسين ذهب إلى مزبلة التاريخ.
عليك أن تحترم نفسك وتؤدب ألفاظك جيدا، وإلا أسوي بيك شيء ما تتصور أبدا. حجمي فارسي قشمر، أدمرك بأي أدب.
يا جماعة احترم نفسك قشمر. يا جماعة
أنت إيراني.
اطلع يا سيد. سيد وسيد اللي جابوك يا سيد.
حجمي هذه وثائقك. أنت مواطن إيراني
يا سيدي.
أنت حجمي. أنت
اظهروه.
هذا أنت مواطن إيراني.
يقولون من هو
سيدك تفضل. سيد أمثالك قاتلكم سيادته. أنت مش جزء من مصلحة. طاح حظك وحظ الحساب الآخر.
يا سيدي أرجوك تجلس.
حجمي
لا يصح هذا الكلام يا أخي.
ما يصير سيده وسيده خلفوه. صدام حسين سيده وسيده خلفوه. هذا الإيراني.
طيب نجلس أرجوك نجلس. لنرد بهدوء وبدون عصبية رجاء. ليس هكذا تناقش الأمور.
أنت تعرف أن صدام أعدم شقيقي وأعدم الكثير من أتباعي ومن أقربائي وأعدم خال أولادي، ولكن صدام بالطريقة التي أعدموه بها أثبت نفسه أنه رجل وشجاع، وفعلا أصبح شهيدنا، وسنحج إلى أو نزور قبره كما يزار الأولياء الصالحين. شخص محكوم بالإعدام يعدموه في يوم العيد. هؤلاء الذين أعدموه هم الذين قتلوا سيدنا عمر رضي الله عنه، وذاتهم الذين قتلوا سيدنا أبي بكر، وذاتهم الذين يكرهون عفوا سيدنا أبي بكر ويكرهون كل الصحابة.
المشاهدين الذين انضموا إلينا، يعني كان معنا قبل قليل السيد صادق الموسوي وانسحب بعد دقيقة.
هو ليس صادق الموسوي. أنت تعرف اسمه ليس صادق الموسوي. لا تشارك بعملية تزوير اسمه.
وسيعود إلينا، ويبدو أنه سيعود إلينا. أرجو أن يعود السيد صادق وبدون شخصنة للأمور رجاء.
إذا أساء الأدب أو تكلم عن صدام
يا سيد بشعان، الموضوع سياسي. قل ما تشاء في السياسة.
تكلم بأدب. أوكي
تفضل.
لا تسيء لفكر الرئيس الشهيد.
يا سيدي بس يا جماعة،
لا تسيء.
أين فكره؟
الرئيس الشهيد صدام حسين لقد أصبح إمام المقاومين والأبطال الآن. وجهة نظري، وعليك أن تحترم مشاعري ومشاعر الناس.
يا أخي دقيقة.
أسمح
يا زلمة. يا أخي
سأشتمه إلى آخر البرنامج.
والله
وافعل ما تشاء.
والله
وافعل ما تشاء.
أرجع أقول لك أنصحك لله
لا تنصح لها. اقتلني في العراق. ارسل ميليشياتك.
Well, not exactly Shields and Brooks, is it? Wow. Will a troop surge heal that? A lesson in what we're up against, finding a political solution in Iraq. Again, that Sunni versus Shiite debate on Al Jazeera, as found on TV critic Virginia Heffernan's television blog on NewYorkTimes.com. Thanks for scoping that out, Virginia. Wow. All right, here's something from another political debate that has resurfaced online after more than a decade. Mitt Romney, the former governor of Massachusetts, is positioning himself as the true conservative in the presidential race, but someone unearthed and posted this video of Romney from 1994 when he ran against and debated a liberal icon, Democratic Senator Edward Kennedy.
If abortion is morally wrong, aren't you responsible for discouraging it?
One of the great things about our nation, Sally, is that we're each entitled to have strong personal beliefs, and we encourage other people to do the same. But as a nation, we recognize the right of all people to believe as they want, and not to impose our beliefs on other people. I believe that abortion should be safe and legal in this country. I have since the time that my mom took that position when she ran in 1970 as a U.S. Senate candidate. I believe that since Roe v. Wade has been the law for 20 years, that we should sustain and support it. And I sustain and support that law and the right of a woman to make that choice.
Oops, can you say for it before he was against it? That's just what Romney doesn't want people to say, so he posted this response on the web last week.
So what is it about this YouTube video from 1994 showing you as a flip-flopper? What's that about?
Well, I just got to look at the excerpts from my debate against Ted Kennedy in 1994, and it reminded me of why I ran against him in the first place. Someone had to give him a run for his money. Now it also shows, what 13 years will do. I'm grayer, I'm a little heavier, and I hope I've grown a bit wiser as well. Of course, I was wrong on some issues back then. I'm not embarrassed to admit that. I think most of us learn with experience. I know I certainly have. If you want to know where I stand, by the way, you don't have to just listen to my words. You can go to look at my record as governor. Frankly, in the bluest of states, facing the most liberal media in the country, I've led the fight to preserve traditional marriage. I've taken every legal step I could conceive of to prevent same-sex marriage. I've also taken action to protect the sanctity of life. I vetoed bills that authorized embryo farming, therapeutic cloning, Plan B, emergency contraception, and of course a redefinition of when life was going to begin as well.
So can you trust Mitt Romney to keep his word more than, say, John McCain? The web reveals, you decide. The other candidate who made news online, well, it's been such a big story everywhere the last 2 days, we won't dwell on it. But remember when he teased us on Monday Night Football?
I would like to announce to my hometown of Chicago and all of America that I am ready for the Bears to go all the way, baby. Dun, 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 dun.
The Bears got lucky on Sunday, by the way, right? But no tease this time from Barack Obama. Now it's official as of yesterday. And we note that this formal announcement of the first step in a presidential campaign came in a web video.
I have great faith and hope about the future because I believe in you. And that's why I want to tell you first that I'll be filing papers today to create a presidential exploratory committee.
By the way, go Saints. Sorry, Obama. But that one from BarackObama.com. And finally tonight, it's hard enough to tell the difference between real and fake news these days. But here's a video getting a lot of hits that raises the question, what is real and what is fake beauty? Check out how makeup meets Photoshop in this online ad for Dove soap. So how's that for a marketing strategy? A beauty product mocking artificial beauty. And that's our online video roundup for this week. Now, Venezuela to New York. The populist leftist president Hugo Chavez is in the news this week for meeting with Iranian leader Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. For Chavez, it's an opportunity to make a show of being an enemy of the United States. For us, it's an opportunity to talk about the changing politics of rich and poor in the Americas and the Venezuelan community here in the U.S. Google Earth is taking us visually here from Venezuela on the northern coast of South America to New York. According to the website findlocalweather.com, it's 2,149 miles from the capital Caracas to New York. That's like 1.5 times from Miami to New York. And the temperature was in the 80s there today, by the way. Aren't you jealous? But things seem politically hot all the time between Venezuela and the United States right now. So let's talk about it with Francisco Rodriguez, Latin American Studies and Economics professor at Wesleyan University in Connecticut. He used to work for the Chavez government. And Nicholas Kozloff, senior research analyst at the Council on Hemispheric Affairs think tank and author of Hugo Chavez, Oil, Politics, and Challenge to the U.S., published by the St. Martin's Press. Thank you both very much for joining us. Thanks. We'll see another clip in a minute in which Chavez defends the Iranian nuclear program. But, Professor Rodriguez, why would Hugo Chavez care one way or another about Iran's nuclear energy or nuclear weapons?
Okay, well, first of all, just a clarification. I worked for the National Assembly, which is a legislative power, when it was independent of the executive. So I don't think that it's correct to say that I worked for the
his
government.
But clarify for us, because I believe that you went there from the U.S. shortly after he took power. That's correct. Partly because you were excited about what you thought was the potential of Chavez, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And you know, whenever I have this type of discussions with those who hold a favorable view of Chavez, there's a certain sense in which I feel sympathetic, and I recollect exactly the way that I felt when I was going back to Venezuela. I felt, you know, here there's a project to make Venezuela a more democratic, open society, to reverse the great inequalities that exist in our country, or to transform it. And what I found with the people who worked with me during the time that we were in the Economic and Financial Advisory Office to the National Assembly was very different. And we found, and this is to get to the root of your question, we found a government and a political movement that was in power that really wanted to see everything in terms of black and white. There were its friends and there were its opponents, and anybody who was part of its opponents was demonized. And
so hold it right there, because this is a good point to jump in and show you this. Here is Hugo Chavez from a British TV interview in September in which he defends Iran's nuclear program.
President Ahmadinejad is accused of attempting to develop a nuclear bomb. Do you think he would be wise to develop a nuclear bomb, given the pressure he's under from the United States?
There is not a single evidence that proves that Iran is manufacturing a nuclear weapon. On the contrary, there are statements by senior authorities of the International Energy Organization that says that they are not manufacturing this weapon. And I do believe those statements. I've been to Isfahan. I know they say the truth. We have to ask the United States to leave the world in peace, that they leave Iran to develop peaceful energy. Any country could do it. Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela also have the intentions to do that for peaceful purposes.
All right, so Nicholas Kozloff, let me come to you. You're our Chavez supporter here tonight. Or relative to Mr. Rodriguez, why would Iran, the Iranian nuclear program in particular, be of interest one way or another to Chavez?
Well, I think that both Iran and Venezuela are members of OPEC. Chavez has a vested interest in keeping the price of oil high. It's very important for him to carry out his ambitious social programs, and all of that's contingent on the high price of oil. And so it's very logical that he would want to solidify ties to Iran. Personally, I deplore Ahmadinejad. You know, I'm very wary of his fundamentalist ideas. But I certainly understand why Chavez is pursuing an alliance with Ahmadinejad. It's just the enemy of the enemy is my friend. So I think it's entirely logical.
Yeah, and do you want to follow up on what you were saying?
I agree with that. I mean, I think that Chavez sees himself in a confrontation with the U.S., and he believes, and he just recently said, you know, this is a war with the empire, and then he joked saying, well, we're not planning to invade the U.S. for now. So Chavez has gone on record as saying that he believes that the World Trade Center attacks may have been caused by the U.S. government, and that the World Trade Center towers might have been imploded from within by explosives.
Is he just being provocative, or do you think he really believes that's a possibility?
So. I think that Chavez and what I've seen in Venezuela over the last few years, and what I saw when I was there, was a government that was becoming very radicalized and had a view of the world in which there are either those who are with them and those who are against them, and those who are against them are evil. And it applies to the Venezuelan opposition, it applies to the Venezuelan media, it applies to the U.S., it applies to anybody who is against Chavez. And so it's very consistent with his worldview, which I do think is a very dangerous worldview.
After the meeting between Ahmadinejad and Chavez, they announced a call on other oil-producing nations to reduce oil production to raise the price. Now, that would help their economies and hurt oil-consuming nations like the United States. Is that a political as well as an economic position?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say that for many years, Chavez has pursued a kind of oil diplomacy in South America, which is pretty much designed to sideline U.S. oil interests, and he's tried to, for example, carry out plans for a South American oil company called Petrosur, which would ally state oil companies in South America, in Brazil and Argentina, with the state oil company in Venezuela. And so I think oil is really the secret to Chavez's diplomacy. He's used it to solidify a lot of geopolitical ties within the region.
You see the phone number on your screen, by the way. We don't have a lot of time for phone calls in this segment, but we have a little time if you want to call in on the Chavez-Ahmadinejad summit, and they're saying nice words about each other, and what you think about that, or Chavez's place in his country and in the Americas in general. You can do that right now, 212-251-0801. You should see the number on your screen, 212-251-0801. And Professor Rodriguez, Iran's and Venezuela's oil industries have very different relationships to the United States. The U.S. does not do business with Iran, despite how much oil they produce. The U.S. is Chavez's biggest buyer of Venezuelan oil. Does that make their interests different?
Well, I think that we live in a world where the oil market is very much integrated, so that both of these countries are really more worried about the price of oil. That is, if Venezuela doesn't sell to the U.S., then somebody else will, and Venezuela will sell to whoever else can buy it. And indeed, Chavez's strategy has been to try to get Venezuela to sell less and less to the U.S. and to sell to other countries, because he wants to depend less on the U.S. Now, Venezuela and Iran do have a structural similarity, which is that both of these countries are constrained by their production capacity. They're not like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia can expand production by very large amounts, basically almost overnight, so that Saudi Arabia can actually take advantage of lower prices. Venezuela and Iran cannot expand production, and therefore they want to have prices as high as possible. And I think that they're both really worried about the fact that oil prices have fallen and want to do something to try to stop it. Now, I don't think that Saudi Arabia and other producers within OPEC are actually going to let them do it.
Yeah, so they may get together and call for higher OPEC prices, cutbacks in production to create higher prices, right, but you don't think they're going to get it from the group?
Well, it doesn't seem. I mean, the internal politics of OPEC are somewhat complex, but it doesn't seem like there's consensus right now. And Saudi Arabia has voiced its opposition to more production cuts.
Nicholas, they also announced a $2 billion fund for countries interested in thwarting U.S. domination, as they call it, a $2 billion investment fund. What do they have in mind? What countries do they have in mind?
Well, I haven't followed. That's a recent story. I'm not entirely sure where it's going to lead, but it's not surprising in light of the overall thrust of his diplomacy. I mean, I think for many years, the media's focused a lot recently on Venezuela's diplomacy with Iran, but I think Chavez has peripatetically traveled all over the world pursuing ties with many third world countries, for example, in Africa. And so that's not always something that Americans read about. They tend to glom onto Iran because Iran is quite a high-profile foe of the U.S. But I would say that, by and large, I think what he's trying to do is to pursue all kinds of commercial, diplomatic ties to, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, and even to China, India, and so I think that that almost resulted in Venezuela securing a non-permanent seat at the Security Council, and the only reason they probably didn't was as a result of U.S. pressure.
Let's take a phone call. Here is Troy in Borough Park. Hello, Troy. You're on the air.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
All right. How you doing? Thank you.
Well, my only question is that if we're comparing Chavez to making ties with Iran, you have to realize that Russia's making ties with Iran, China's making ties with Iran, and there are Iran's not only outreaching to, let's say, Chavez, but he's also reaching out to Ecuador. He's also reaching out to Nicaragua. So it's not just the evil Iran working with Chavez, but it's also Iran working with all these other nations. I'd like to hear their comments on that.
Fair enough, Francisco Rodriguez?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't overemphasize Iran. I think that Chavez has a very good relationship with Ahmadinejad, and they certainly share a lot, and Iran helped Venezuela for the Security Council bid. But yeah, I do think that there are a lot of further elements in Chavez's strategy, and I think that a lot of what's more important right now than Chavez's alliance with Iran is sort of what's happening in Venezuela. The nation's oldest TV station is being closed down by the government. Chavez is trying to reform the constitution to allow himself the power of indefinite re-election. There are, and I think that we should also, I think it's very important to discuss, and where I try to concentrate my research as an academic on what are the real effects of Chavez's social programs, because there are a lot of people who believe that he has been helping and redistributing oil wealth, and at least the research that we have done has failed to find very strong evidence of that.
What do you think about, first, the democracy piece? If he's shutting down opposition media, if he's changing the Constitution so he can be president for life, is this the kind of thing that people who consider themselves progressive want to support?
Well, I have mixed feelings about the media. I actually I have some concerns about his handling of the media issue, but actually what I was struck by when I was down in Venezuela over the summer was the incredible openness on the media to say what you want. And you turn on to, for example, Globovisión, which is the opposition-run TV station in Caracas. And the opposition pundits were saying the most vitriolic kinds of statements about Chavez that you would never, ever see here in the U.S. With pundits criticizing Bush. So I think a lot of Americans have this idea that there's this incredible media clampdown in Venezuela. I do have some concerns about, some of his handling of the media, but by and large, I would say there's quite a deal of openness to say what you want in Venezuela.
And changing the Constitution, we hear this a lot, that he's setting himself up with dictatorial powers, and because he's so politically strong right now, he may get away with it, and then there it will be in the Venezuelan Constitution.
Well, I think there are many ironies in the Venezuela story, and I think even as we see increasing centralization, for example, rule by decree and maybe consolidation of many of the smaller political parties into one large party in Venezuela, I also see incredible promise for the growth of grassroots democracy in Venezuela, and I think it's very encouraging to see the growth of cooperatively owned businesses, Bolivarian circles, and communal councils. These are kind of mechanisms which could, in theory, lead to greater participatory democracy. But I think what you're seeing is a kind of contradictory process. On the one hand, maybe a greater cult of personality around Chavez, but on the other hand, I do think you have to give him credit for at least setting up these mechanisms that could lead to greater participatory mechanisms.
Now, last year, we found a highly insulting and highly humorous clip on the web of President Chavez giving a speech in rural Venezuela with a few choice words for President Bush. And in light of our discussion tonight, here it is again.
En mi mal inglés, en mi bad English, You are a donkey, Mr. Danger. You are a donkey. Me refiero, ustedes saben, para decirlo con todas sus letras, a Mr. George W. Bush. You are a donkey, Mr. Bush.
So what insight do we get from that tape into the governing style or rhetorical style or foreign policy style of Hugo Chavez when he goes on video and calls President Bush a donkey? Any?
Well, I think that's his showmanship. And yeah, Hugo Chavez is his show. He sort of likes to go on TV and speak for hours and hours, and he sings, he jokes, and he sort of insults everyone that he doesn't like that particular day. That's and I think it's important. I think it reveals something about his style. But I don't think that that's sort of fundamentally what's most important about what's happening in Venezuela. And I would tend to disagree with respect to the climate of civil and political liberties in Venezuela. There are many examples. I think just for starters, the government built several instances of what's known right now as the My Santa database, which is a database that has the political opinions of 12.4 million Venezuelans, which are documented. This is routinely used in government offices. It's used to screen job applicants. It's used to screen recipients of social services. There are more than 700 cases before the Inter-American Human Rights Courts of people who claim that they were fired from government jobs because they signed the recall petition against Chavez. There's what's a horrible case of Angel Pedreañez, whose his family's attorney claims that this is a 20-year-old soldier who was, according to his family's attorney, burned to death because he signed the recall referendum petition against Chavez. The former finance minister, Francisco Uzon, denounced the case and made some arguments on TV against the government explanation of what had happened, and he's in jail for having insulted the armed forces. So no, I disagree. I don't think that this is a society in which there is respect for civil and political liberties. I do think that Chavez is doing it little by little, and up until now there had been too much international attention on Venezuela, and he still hadn't consolidated his power enough to do what he wants to do. Now he's starting to close down media.
I do have some concerns about human rights, but I would also say it depends on how you define human rights, whether you define that in terms of social and economic rights. I do have some concerns about the police, for example, in Venezuela, human rights abuses, and the prison system in Venezuela. Recently there was a riot and 22 people got killed. So I do have some concerns on that level. But I would also say, look, if you define human rights in a broader sense, I think that socially there's been incredible improvement in people's lives. Over the summer, I visited women's cooperatives, for example, in Caracas and out in the countryside. And they'll tell you quite explicitly, look, our lives have improved.
You disagree with that, too?
Yeah, I disagree. I mean, first of all, I would say that even if that were true, I don't think that that can ever be an excuse for the type of human rights violations, such as those that I've just described, and the type of political persecution that happens against the opponents of the Chavez administration. But it'd be a very interesting dilemma if it were true. But at least the research that I've done, and I want to emphasize, and for other academics who are working on this, my data is completely available. I would actually like other people who do research in this area to look at the results, to look at the data. But basically, the data that we've looked at has not found evidence that even closely resembles, even faintly resembles the government's claim. Let me just put an example. So we've done a lot of research on the Venezuelan Literacy program, and on September of 2005, the Venezuelan government claimed that they had eradicated illiteracy, that they had taught 1.5 million people how to read and write, and that this was a great triumph. So this is the type of stuff that leads some people to think, well, apparently they're making progress in the social arena. We looked at the Venezuelan household surveys produced by the Venezuelan National Statistical Institute, the same surveys that the Venezuelan government uses to calculate poverty, to calculate unemployment. That survey has questions about illiteracy. What we found was basically next to no decline in illiteracy. More than 1 million Venezuelans were illiterate. barely down, only 90,000 down from before the governance program, and even that small decline appears to be just a result of demographic factors.
So you're saying either it's a facade or they're not spending the money well, one or the other?
I think that they're extremely inefficient, and I think that it's also a facade.
What about public health, though? I heard that Venezuela has gotten 20,000 doctors from Cuba. Cuba does export doctors to other developing nations, especially like-minded ones, and that this has really had an impact on public health. Not true?
Right. Well, it's first of all, there's a question of inputs and a question of outputs. And one of them is, how much are they putting in? Are they putting in 20,000 doctors, 100,000 trainers, which is what they claim to put into a literacy program? And the second is, what is it that is being produced out of that? What are the concrete improvements? I have no way of evaluating or of knowing if there are 20,000 Cuban doctors. I can tell you that we looked at the consistency of the 100,000 trainers that they claim to have incorporated, and there was absolutely no evidence that that was the case. But nevertheless, what I can tell you is that if you look at Venezuelan health statistics, what do you find? You find that the proportion of underweight and underweight babies has actually increased during the Chavez administration. You find that there has been a decline in infant mortality, but that the decline is not distinguishable in terms of the trend from the decline that was occurring before.
So let me get a response, because we're going to run out of time soon. Nicholas?
I think there are glaring inefficiencies. I think it is sometimes disappointing when you go out and you consider, well, he's had 8 years, and how do you explain some of these glaring inefficiencies? But let's bear in mind that we're dealing with a historically very bureaucratic state that was corrupt, and that's what he's dealing with. I'm not excusing if there are inefficiencies, but I think, listen, I think you have to give him credit for at least undertaking some pretty ambitious programs. I spoke to many of those Cuban doctors. I think that in impoverished areas of Caracas and other areas, it's the first doctor that many of those poor people have ever seen. This is in no way to make a claim that the overall health system has radically improved. But I think in terms of primary care and gaining access at that level, I think it's certainly improved. In housing, too, I think there have been some pretty dramatic accomplishments, some glaring inefficiencies, but I think you can go, for example, to Ciudad Miranda. It's a housing complex outside of Caracas where people have set up cooperatively owned businesses, and people have been relocated there. So I think I have some reservations. There are some inefficiencies, but by and large, I give him some credit.
Professor Rodriguez, before you go, you're a Venezuelan American. When we think of Latin American immigrants to the United States, we usually think of Dominicans and Mexicans, maybe Colombians, not so much Venezuelans. Is there much of a Venezuelan American community?
Well, it's been growing. It's been growing actually over the past 20 years. There's probably been a greater rhythm of growth during the Chavez years. Basically, Venezuela was a very rich country. Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America because of its wealth in oil.
In fact, for a time in the 20th century, there was immigration to Venezuela, including from Europe.
That's right. And, I have a friend who actually works in New York and who came here in the 70s. And he told me that when he came here, all of his friends in Venezuela told him, why are you going to the U.S.? You can earn 2 or 3 times as much as you stay in Venezuela. Now it's the other way around.
People are fleeing Chavez's economy? Is that what you're saying?
No, there's been I wouldn't say that, actually, because here's the point. The Venezuelan economy is growing very rapidly. I don't think it's growing very rapidly because of Chavez's policy. It's growing very rapidly because Chavez has had a 5-fold expansion in oil revenues, and of course that's allowed him to spend a lot, and it's allowed him to generate very high rate of economic growth, which is what got him reelected. So I don't think that people are leaving because of that, although there are people who are leaving because they're worried about what can happen in terms of political repression.
Is there any Little Caracas or any Venezuelan neighborhood, either here in New York or anywhere that you know of?
I understand that there's a place called Weston in Miami that some people called Westenzuela.
Any Venezuelan restaurants you'd recommend?
There's La Flor's Kitchen here in New York, and there's, well, that's the one that I've been to, which is very good, actually.
Where's that?
I think it's over 11th or 12th Street, I think, if I remember correctly. They have very good arepas.
You have a favorite dish?
Arepas.
Which are?
Corn cakes, Venezuelan corn cakes. Wonderful.
We're going to leave it there for now. Obviously, a lot more discussion about Hugo Chavez to come in the United States, especially if the rhetoric keeps up between the two countries. I want to thank you both very much for coming in tonight. And coming up in a minute, excerpts from Mayor Bloomberg's State of the City address and reactions to his proposals for tax cuts and development on the west side of Harlem and teacher tenure reform. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Protect yourself from mannequinism. Volunteer. Vote. Stay informed. It's easy to get involved.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
When it comes to continuing education, all stops lead to CUNY. More than 200,000 New Yorkers of all ages in all 5 boroughs are enrolled in CUNY adult education courses. If you're looking for new job skills to enhance your career, start a new career, or if you want to enjoy a class in the arts, sciences, and humanities, then get on the train and come to one of CUNY's 19 campuses. CUNY continuing and professional education programs offer you more opportunities than any other learning institution in New York City. CUNY gives you high-quality instruction at low cost with schedules to meet your busy lifestyle. For more information, call 1-866-344-CUNY or log on to www.cuny.edu/continuinged. Hurry up, don't miss your stop, come to CUNY.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. Mayor Bloomberg gave his annual State of the City address today. Headline, read his lips, $1 billion in new tax cuts, new report cards for teachers and schools, and a promise to community college students. Now here's the mayor laying out some of his education proposals.
By next fall, we'll be sending user-friendly reports on every school to every public school parent across the city. Each school will receive a grade from A to F on its year-to-year progress in helping students advance. Personally, I can't think of a better way to hold a principal's feet to the fire than arming mom and dad with the facts about how well or poorly their children's school is performing. Our third reform focuses on the classrooms. Reforming the tenure process, which we'll undertake with the help of the United Federation of Teachers, will allow us to reward teacher excellence and begin to eliminate mediocrity. The UFT shares my view that improving the number of quality teachers is the most important critical element of all in driving reform. Too many of our new teachers leave the system after only a few years, frustrated by their inability to make a difference for children. We must do a better job of keeping new teachers who are effective instructors, and we must continue to give them the support that they need. But at the same time, we must also make sure that ineffective teachers are not awarded the privilege of tenure and the near lifetime job security that comes with it. Accordingly, we are building a more rigorous review process, one that will assure that tenure decisions are made thoughtfully and based on the facts.
Mayor Bloomberg, and we will see more excerpts from the State of the City speech as we go. Joining now for reaction, our City Council Education Committee Chairman, Robert Jackson, who represents Manhattan's West Side from Harlem North, and Harry Siegel, who edits a website called citiesonahill.org, which is affiliated with the conservative think tank, the Manhattan Institute. Some of you may know his father, the commentator and professor and historian Fred Siegel. Harry, welcome to WNYC. Welcome to CUNY TV for the first time on this program, and Councilman, welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Councilman, as Education Committee Chair, what do you think of those proposals? We've got a lot of new stuff on the table there. We've got teacher tenure reform. We've got report cards for schools. We've got more power but more risk for principals if it goes into effect the way the mayor proposes.
Well, you know, it all sounds good. It's in the packages with music and bells and whistles. And the bottom line is all in the details. When you talk about tenure and tenure reform for teachers, there's a contract in place. And the contract talks about evaluation. So unless there's contract negotiations on that particular matter, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. When it comes to grading schools and giving schools a grade of A, B, C, D, F, I think that overall that's good. How that's worked out in the details is another question. Are they going to hold principals accountable if they receive a C grade when, you know, they've moved students from maybe the 30 percentile to the 40 percentile but have not reached a threshold of 50 percentile? You know, those are questions that need to be asked. And so I'm waiting to hear the details of this and before I pass judgment. But I said to some people today that it seems though we're moving from centralization back to decentralization with community superintendents.
With community superintendents who will now report directly to the chancellor, the mayor said, doing away with these 10 regional districts, going back to the 32 old school districts reporting to central. But which way would you like to see this go? You say we want to see, do you want to see the city get tougher on principals and hold them more accountable to the higher end of the threshold you were talking about, or easier on principals?
I want to see decentralization, where decisions are made at the local level by the individual principals and parents and superintendents. We went to total centralization before when Bloomberg got mayoral control, to where they were controlling what you put on your bulletin board and where you had to sit on the floor. Totally inappropriate. So I want to go towards decentralization, but I want more empowerment, more transparency, and more accountability, at not only at the principal's level, at every level, including students and parents.
Harry Siegel, what do you think of all this?
Well, I think accountability is the word. The question here is, Mayor Bloomberg has talked about a culture of accountability in our schools, and his proposals today, I think that's what they have in common. The problem is, so far, he hasn't shown so much in the way of results. Barring some election year miracles in 2005, it's been mixed. I think everyone agrees mayoral control is likely to be a good thing long term. It does create some of these pressures. For a second-term mayor, of course, that accountability isn't quite there in the same way.
Because he doesn't have to stand for election again.
Yeah.
But if it's not proceeding as quickly as you would have hoped, is it because it just takes a long time to turn around this Titanic of an education system, or is it because the mayor is not doing the right things, in your opinion?
I think it's probably a combination of the two. I think the mayor is a brilliant technocrat, and Klein has proven to be one as well. They've done a lot to sort of increase efficiencies, to make sure that new books are in, that the contracts are handled reasonably well. At the same time, they've had two straight people in charge of curriculum who strongly disagree with the ideas that Bloomberg ran on and that Klein says he holds, which is just of itself very odd. And with this tenure idea, I'm struck because Mayor Bloomberg has a habit of saying that unions agree with him and they have aims in common when this obviously isn't true. I find it hard to see teachers willing to give up on this, and it reminds me of the recent deal with the PBA, in which young cops now are making less than $25,000 when they start, and that's something that Bloomberg agreed to try to bring costs under control over time in exchange for a raise for older cops. And what happened is they can't get enough young cops. They're going to have to give those guys more money. Nobody else is going to have to give up on the raises they've had. And there have been a number of labor negotiations that have gone in these terms, in which the mayor seems to say we all agree, and then gets fleeced.
In fact, the mayor acknowledged that this tenure reform would have to take place through the collective bargaining process with the UFT. He just agreed to a new contract with the UFT, and as you've said, he's a lame duck. Does he even have another contract negotiation left to get this in?
That's an excellent question. I'm not sure I know the answer.
Councilman? Or does he reopen the contract now? Randy Weingarten won't let him do that, will she?
Well, I don't believe so. I think clearly there's a process in place. I think you need to use the process in place if, in fact, they down at Tweed, feel that principals are not evaluating teachers and they're rubber stamping, let's say, the tenure, and then they have to, there's a process in place. So all you have to do is make sure that the principals are, evaluating the teachers appropriately in accordance with the rules and regulations. And if some of them do not deserve tenure, so be it. But clearly the majority of the teachers, and I'm talking about 95 or more percent, are going to be effective in the classroom and should, you know, pass satisfactorily. So, and he alluded to in his State of the City address that, you know, he's going to have the cooperation from the union. You bet your life he will not have the cooperation of Randy Weingarten and UFT.
All right, let's move on. More from the State of the City now. The mayor announced a big surplus in the city budget, hooray, and this as a reward for the taxpayers.
But rather than increasing spending in good times that needs to be cut in bad times and thus hurting New Yorkers in the process, I believe that a good portion of the surplus revenues we anticipate in the current fiscal year should go back to the New Yorkers who made sure that this city's recovery, the ones who made sure that this city's recovery from 9/11 exceeded our wildest dreams, and who we want to continue living, working, and investing in New York. So my primary budget will include $1 billion of tax relief. This is a broad-based package of tax cuts designed to pump money back into our neighborhoods, create jobs, lower the burden on property owners, and make New York an even more attractive place to live and work.
All right, Mayor Bloomberg from the State of the City. And Harry, Mayor Bloomberg last year, with the surplus, devoted a lot of it to long-term debt relief, because so much of our tax dollar goes to paying down the long-term debt. This year, he's returning much more of it back to the taxpayers. And after he said that big headline number, $1 billion in total tax cuts, he listed the specifics: property taxes, unincorporated business taxes, so-called S-corporation taxes, and to eliminate taxes on all clothing and shoes. How much of this do you support?
I think this year and last year, it's a little silly. If the mayor wants to be fiscally responsible and bring the city under control, he has two basic things that have to be dealt with. The city has a workforce much, much larger than it can afford, 1/7 the size of the federal government minus the military, much larger than any other city, large city per capita, or wherever else you measure. That's in some ways the last remaining New Deal program, and it's got a monoculture economy that Mayor Bloomberg touches on every year in the State of the City and never addresses.
Monoculture, in other words, without
Wall Street and knowledge economy, and the real estate boom in the last few years. So
that's what's driving the surplus.
Mayor Bloomberg rarely brings up 9/11. So when he does, and he talks about having a tax hike, his 18% plus property tax hike that was necessary for New Yorkers, it's hard to object to. But when he then is bragging about a 5% decrease, leaving New Yorkers with much higher taxes, especially because last month, the new assessments have substantially raised the value of most people's properties and essentially negated this.
Now, again, viewers, we're not going to have time for many phone calls on this segment, but I wonder if there are teachers out there who want to react to this idea of tenure reform, principals out there who want to react to this idea of more responsibility but more accountability, maybe some parents. Do you like the idea of report cards for the schools your children are in? 212-251-0801. You see the number on your screen, 212-251-0801. How do you like these tax cuts, folks, or any other reaction to the mayor's State of the City, as you're probably just learning about this right now or in the last few hours? 212-251-0801. We have time for a few phone calls. If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is the mayor's got a nice little short-term windfall here because Wall Street happens to be doing well and real estate happens to be doing well.
And because he saw us out on 9/11. We got to give him credit for that.
What you would like to see is structural reform so that he fires a lot of city workers, or at least reduces the workforce, because that's the way to balance the budget long term. Very briefly.
In his first State of the City, Mayor Bloomberg used the statistic I just gave, and he said we're not going to be able to afford this long term. He still knows that.
All right.
Everyone else does. He's within the limits of not dealing with New York's biggest problems. He does a great job.
Councilman Jackson.
Everyone applauds a decrease in taxes. I do too. But then I ask the question, what about the 40,000 homeless that we're dealing with in New York City, where we passed a lead paint law where the Daily News report says that they're putting children into lead-tainted apartments? And what about all of the schools in New York City? we don't have enough space for all of our children. And what about the CFE? New York City probably will have to put money into CFE. We need to reduce class size and increase the capacity of our schools in order to educate our children.
So are there particular ones of these tax cuts that you are inclined to vote against?
But what I'm saying is that a tax cut is fine, but we have to look at that also. And then, is it for renters too? Or is it only for homeowners? Well, if it's not for renters, I'm not in favor of it. I will say give it to the landlords that own the buildings so that when the rent stabilization board meets, then the increase will not be so high on the million renters that we have in New York City.
But are you saying there are any of these tax cuts that you would actually oppose?
I'm saying that if it doesn't affect the people that I represent the most, and I have over 6,000 to 7,000 co-op and condo owners in my district, I have about 300 homeowners, and I have tens of thousands of renters. Renters pay taxes just like everyone else.
Harry, before we cheer for tax cuts without asking questions, are some of these regressive? Property taxes are already low in New York compared to other places. Clothing is already tax exempt up to $110, so this is only cutting it on the higher priced items. Business taxes don't seem to be scaring business away, one could argue, based on the boom times the mayor is claiming we're in. But we still have all these poverty needs, education needs, health care needs that the councilman is talking about. Is this money really going where it's needed most in these tax cuts?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's an excellent question. First off, the property taxes in New York are always a tricky and politically charged issue. You saw the leverage Anthony Weiner was able to get off them in the last mayoral campaign. Because they've gone up so much and because that corresponded with Bloomberg's one period of really low popularity, I think it's something that he's been very cognizant of. Additionally, in order to keep the $400 rebate, which is extremely politically popular, giving money away, giving money back to people always is, he had to have an additional cut this year, the way the legislature set that up, which was due to expire. But again, I think for the long-term health of the city and for generating an economy that can be stable and that can do well when we're not booming and maintain businesses and jobs, what's needed is a smaller, healthier government that we can afford in good times and bad.
And it's an interesting thing to point out before we give him too much credit, that the law did actually require him to cut property taxes in order to keep that rebate program going. Now, here is more from the State of the City speech. This is about development and of particular interest to Councilman Jackson's Harlem constituents.
And because New York's international leadership also depends on our great educational and research institutions, we will promote projects such as the development of Columbia University's new campus in a ways that also meets the needs of its host West Harlem community. We'll unveil a master plan to build on the amazing renaissance of the South Bronx and another to transform Willets Point. We'll rezone Jamaica, Coney Island, and 125th Street to catalyze new business development. We'll work with the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership that's doing so much to promote business and the arts in this great borough. And we'll help launch construction of the most exciting private development project Brooklyn has ever seen, the Atlantic Yards project.
Development around New York City, some in your district. I know that Columbia University expansion is very controversial. Are you as excited about it as he is?
Yes, I am. I'm excited. It's a multi-billion-dollar project, and we have the West Harlem Local Development Corp that will be sitting down with Columbia for the first time across the table to try to reach a local benefits agreement with the community, and they're meeting this Friday.
So you're optimistic?
I'm optimistic because what it means for the people that I represent and the entire Harlem community is jobs, construction jobs, permanent jobs, and opportunities for a lot of things such as working with the schools in our community and training programs, and that is all good. It's good for Columbia. It will be good for the community if we can reach an agreement. And so we're trying to do that.
Let's go right back to the speech. One more clip from Mayor Bloomberg's State of the City address, a promise for thousands of CUNY students.
The second commission recommendation we're announcing today will help working students at CUNY community colleges step forward to earn higher degrees and then higher incomes. Right now, the demands of their jobs prevent far too many of them from completing their studies. And without degrees, they often remain among our working poor. So this September, the City University will establish dedicated morning, afternoon, and evening tracks, enabling some working students to do all of their schoolwork during hours that are convenient for them. As far as we know, no community college system anywhere has ever attempted this approach. But every successful business offers services that reflect customers' needs, and so should government.
All right, Mayor Bloomberg, and that's really government as consumer service provider. You like that proposal?
Education is the most necessary service. I think it's fantastic. I think CUNY is on the rise. The Graduate Center is a wonderful place. I think that the whole system's doing well. And a proposal like that allows working students to get an education is terrific. I would say I would like to live in a city where people cannot have a degree and still not be in the working poor. And I think Bloomberg has taken some good steps in that direction, including vocational schools and many that haven't been. To briefly touch on development, if I may. Mayor Bloomberg's been a very tricky spot. A lot of the particular projects haven't been ideal and haven't been ideal for the communities they're in. Atlantic Center is one I follow closely. At the same time, he's brought real estate dollars during this boom that weren't going to stay on the table to communities that have not had access to them before. Columbia, Brooklyn, Willits Point, and in the course of doing that, he's really sort of diversified the city's economy and brought in investments that otherwise wouldn't have been there.
We have a minute left. Last thing, big picture. And I need 15 seconds from each of you to listen to the whole speech. The city is in remarkably good shape compared to almost anywhere. Crime is going lower still, even if it goes back up nationwide. The city's unemployment hit an all-time low as the bond rating hit an all-time high, the mayor said. Real estate prices went up another 19% while they sagged elsewhere in America last year. Not good for affordability, but good as an indicator of New York's desirability. Are we in that good shape?
We're in good shape. Mayor Bloomberg is allowed to boast some, and he's also had good luck in sort of smoothing over a lot of his critics, partly through private Bloomberg money. And I'd point out things like Sean Bell, 50% black male unemployment, and serious problems and concerns that were not addressed.
Councilman, he didn't mention Sean Bell. Councilman Barron said, hey, unemployment's not 4% in my district. I don't know what New York City Mayor Bloomberg is talking about. What do you say?
I agree with Councilmember Barron. In fact, unemployment in our communities are much higher than that, 15, 20%. And that's for people that are looking for jobs. It's even higher than that for those people who have already decided not to look anymore because they can't find the opportunity. So overall, things are looking great. But polls have said that community police relations are down, very bad, need to be improved. But overall, we're in good shape.
The state of the city, according to Mayor Bloomberg, Harry Siegel, and Councilman Robert Jackson. Thank you both very much. And that's it for tonight's show. We are here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. Next week, Nancy Pelosi's daughter, filmmaker Alexandra Pelosi. And don't forget my daily radio show on WNYC, New York Public Radio, weekday mornings at 10. Tomorrow morning, Councilman Jackson and City Council Speaker Christine Quinn react to the State of the City address. And a former Israeli government official talks about the strange relationship between American Jews and Christian evangelicals. That's at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning on WNYC, 93.9 FM and 820 AM. Have a great night.
One of the things